So good morning again, everybody in here. Testing. Good morning, like I said, everybody here and everybody out in Cleveland. Yeah, it keeps going out.
May have to grab one from the back.
Okay. You won't work with just a second, then it goes out. Battery must be needed. Should I just come up here?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Everybody hear me? All right. Like I said, good morning. Good morning to everybody online. Today's scripture, I'm going to go ahead and get into it for this lesson, comes from 1st and 2nd Samuel, several different passages. I'm going to read through all of them, and then we'll go talk about them individually after that. So the first part comes from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. And it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. And then the second passage comes from 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 16 through 17, 32 through 34, and 42, and verse 42. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. And then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast, he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. And then from 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You are very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. And then from 2 Samuel 21, verse 7. The king spared, and I'm going to butcher this name, Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. So that's a bunch of jumping around, but it kind of gives a story here of David and Jonathan, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with kind of what that dynamic was. It says the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel introduce three key figures, Samuel, Saul, and David. The boy Samuel grew up to be an important transitional figure, taking Israel from the era of judges to the time of Israel's united monarchy. He first anointed Saul, then David as king. It says kings were seen, especially as military protectors at the time, able to lead their subjects in battle. God prepared David to take over as leader in Saul's place. The secret anointing of David and plan to make him king created a potential conflict with Saul and his household, and especially with Saul's firstborn, who would be his heir, Jonathan. So today we're talking about that special relationship between Jonathan and David. It said, God's choice of David, a man after his own heart, interrupts the dynastic rule and demonstrates that God is in charge. Both then and in the future, the rise and fall of the rulers and empires is subject to God's control. It says this chapter begins right after David has defeated Goliath. Of course, we all know that story. And proven himself a heroic fighter, willing to defend the reputation of God. King Saul responds by inviting the young shepherd boy to meet with him while David still holds the head of Goliath. So that's kind of where we're at, literally where we're at when we start these verses. It says, and then, let's see where we're starting at. So many verses here. So the first verses that I read from 1 Samuel 18, this will be the first verse from that, verse 1. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. So David leaves a very good impression on Jonathan, right? What he's just done, defeating Goliath, saving the nation. It says, these words are enough to win over the heart of Jonathan, who is with Saul and listening. The phrase become one translates a Hebrew verb describing things bound together in this case, the joining of Jonathan's spirit to David's spirit. This refers to Jonathan's love for the man who has just taken it upon himself to fight a Philistine champion. You know, if you remember the story, of course, of Goliath, nobody else would do it, really, or they didn't want to. You know, Goliath was this giant of a man, fearsome fighter, but David stepped up because he had the power of God with him. Saul showed no willingness to lead or fight for his people, which confirms David's superiority as the future king. So comparing him and Saul, everybody kind of knew David was going to be the one. In Hebrew, the term for love is broad and flexible enough to apply to numerous human relationships. Father and son, mother and daughter-in-law, husband and wife, and people for their leader. And so this last love that we're talking about in this verse is for the leader. And it says it becomes particularly relevant in this context as it describes the general sentiment already growing in Israel and Judah as a people acclaim the leadership potential of David. So David's already becoming like the hero of Israel now. It says Saul's own son, Jonathan was Saul's own son from the royal household. And so if David could win the support of Jonathan, he must be a charismatic and compelling figure. Of course, we know he is. He's a man after God's own heart, capable of winning people over with wisdom of his words. And then verse 2 says, from that day Saul keeps David with him and did not let him return to his family. It says Saul knows his kingship is ending. So he knows, he's about to not be king at some point. His realization colors how we read this text and provides at least two reasons for Saul keeping David from returning home to Bethlehem, which was only a few miles away. On the one hand, Saul's hospitality gives the impression of graciousness. Everybody thinks he's, treating him nice because of what he did. On the other hand, this hospitality gives Saul time to assess David's growing popularity. Keeping David close enables Saul to control him and prevent his reputation from growing. Ultimately, Saul tries to entrap and eliminate David by sending him into battle. So, it's a two-pronged thing what Saul's doing here. It looks like it's nice, but it's really not. You keep your enemies closer, right? Verse 3 says, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. So this refers to like a formalized agreement between two parties, usually with obligations from each to fulfill. So it's a covenant. The covenants can also occur between two groups of people, of course. Usually the weaker side may be forced to promise obedience and military support if it's a country in exchange for safety. it's just kind of like an agreement, and it could be between people and countries or entities. It says Jonathan appears to be the stronger party, given that he's the heir to the throne. Of course, he would be king. Typically, one would expect a king's son to demand support from others, perhaps pressuring a national hero to back his future kinship. So you'd think Jonathan would go that route, get the popular person on his side, so it can be easier for him to be king. It says Jonathan loved David as himself. Jonathan is the subject, and it leaves the impression that he is the one who initiates an alliance, seemingly with little concern for his own future. So, if you think about it, David probably wouldn't have initiated that because he probably would have thought, well, this guy's going to be king. He's not going to want me to be king. So it had to be Jonathan that initiates this whole situation. So it says that Jonathan was the one who initiated the covenant against self-interest. It says Saul will eventually hear of this and grow incensed, describing it as a conspiracy against him. Jonathan's choice to support David places him in agreement with God's call. Perhaps Jonathan perceived that the Spirit of God was upon David and empowering him for his future role as king. So this lesson, what it's really all about, is actually doing God's will. That's what Jonathan was doing in this. And he recognized that David was a special person and probably should be who is leading Israel or the kingdom. Verse 4 says, Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. It says Jonathan's gifts hold significant meaning. In ancient times, royals were identified by their fine robes, which would have been in stark contrast to David's shepherd's garments. By wearing royal robes, David would be associated with the royal entourage, foreshadowing his later ascension. If Jonathan's garments identified him as the Prince of Israel and successor to the throne, then giving them away is like giving up his ambition to rule. So it's kind of symbolic that he did this, that he's passing his royalness on to David. So the second part of this is the book calls an unwavering alliance. It says Saul tries to manipulate David by inviting him to marry into the family. David is nonetheless able to escape, and he proves fearsome to Israel's enemies. Meanwhile, Jonathan stands up for David until Saul swears an oath that he shall not harm the man. However, Saul breaks his oath and again rises to kill David, sending him on the run. And David is now at the mercy of Jonathan, who could easily reveal his location and help Saul's men find him. So then we start with verse 16 here in 1 Samuel 20. It says, So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord call David's enemies to account. It says, in exchange for helping David, Jonathan requests future kindness for his own family to solidify the commitment between the two men. Jonathan expands the scope of their bond. This time the covenant is between Jonathan and the house of David, so him and his whole descendants are included in this. And so it's like the residents of the entire household, including immediate and extended family. And so, of course, we understand that the house is referring to that of a royal dynasty. It includes future descendants and who will rule as king. Jonathan's request acknowledges the significance of David's lineage, as it was commonplace to eliminate the family of rivals after defeating or removing them. So he's trying to prove that, that David should be the king and it should be a long-lasting thing. And of course, his lineage should move on forever. Jonathan invokes the Lord's authority and oversight. So Jonathan is doing what he feels like God is leading him to do in this whole situation. And in this story, Jonathan is really the key figure. Without him, David may not make it be a king. He may be assassinated and murdered, whatever. Saul didn't want him to be the king. So without Jonathan, he may not ever get there. So the Lord definitely used him for David to be where he needs to be. Verse 17 says, And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of the love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan receives a commitment from David, and each man promises to protect the other's family. Jonathan loves David as he loves himself, demonstrating Jonathan's commitment to protecting this person who is favored by God, even at personal risk. So this is a big deal. Jonathan's going out on a limb here himself. He could be also murdered, taken out, made to disappear very easily. All right, so then the verses 32 through 34, it says, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. It says, Saul is concerned that David is a threat to the king's house and dynastic lineage. So he's seeing it, Saul's seeing it through the earthly lens. He wants his family to carry on as the leader in leadership roles. Jonathan's words here are a response to Saul's desperate threat. As long as David lives, Jonathan will not inherit the throne. Verse 33 says, But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him, and then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. So, it gets real here. It shows Saul means business, and if you look back over time and in history, kings wanted to keep power. I mean, much like today, they want to keep power now too, but this shows he would do anything to keep the power. Verse 34 says, Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger on that second day of the feast, and he did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. Jonathan grieves instead of eating and celebrating. This was the new moon feast. Saul has crossed the line of no return, bringing shame upon the family. Okay, so Jonathan doesn't want to have anything to do with this because he knows it's God's will. He doesn't want to help his father. And then in verse 42, it says, Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, and for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. It says Jonathan carries out a plan to communicate secretly with David. Now that he has become aware of Saul's murderous rage, so he comes. I guess he didn't really believe it to begin with, but now he does. Jonathan takes step to ensure David's escape. He leaves a friend. He leaves his friend with a greeting of peace, the Hebrew word shalom, and recalls their commitments. The phrase between your descendants and my descendants forever repeats the terms of the promise to seek the safety of each respective family. So they're kind of bound together, not just them, but also their family. After this meeting, David would remain separated from Jonathan until Jonathan's death. And so then the third part of this is the verses from 2 Samuel chapter 1, 26, 27, and then 21, chapter 21, verse 7. It says, the book of 2 Samuel covers David's 40-year reign, but it begins with a time of mourning. Verse 26 says, I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. After Jonathan's death, David composes a lament, which is what these verses are, for both the fallen prince and his father. A lament is a song that expresses pain, loss, and uncertainty. This response is consistent with David's honorable treatment of God's anointed, even when the king tried to kill David. The poetic expression of love in this verse can easily be misconstrued. As loving relationships are often non-sexual, which is what, you could think of this in that context, of course, and I'm sure a lot of people's minds go there when you read this. Although this verse compares David's love for Jonathan to the love of women, meaning romantic love, the point is that David and Jonathan's bond is either unlike or even stronger than the bonds of a romantic relationship. The English idiom describing close friends as thick as thieves expresses a similar idea. So for us to kind of understand that, we've heard that before. It does not mean that two friends have literally become partners in thievery, but rather that their friendship is very close. So this is just portraying how their friendship was and how close it was. Their families were united when David married Saul's daughter. Verse 27 says, how the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. The phrase weapons of war is reference to Saul and Jonathan who have fallen in battle. This is what he's lamenting. This is an especially poignant metaphor after Saul was killed by falling upon his own sword. And so, we definitely remember that story. David's second anointing comes after that. He is the king. And then chapter 21, verse 7 says, the king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. So like I said, I butchered that name, but what this is talking about says, after ascending to the throne, David, the king, honors his covenant with his now deceased friend. Details of David's kindness to Jonathan's son are recounted in 2 Samuel chapter 9. This graciousness towards Jonathan's disabled son is even more remarkable, given that the rest of Saul's house has been at war with David. Even after Jonathan's death, David remembers and honors his commitment. So that's just an example there at the end of how David did uphold his part of the covenant to take care of Jonathan's family. Just in conclusion here it says, friendship like that between David and Jonathan doesn't just happen. It must be cultivated. It really have any kind of connection, with a bloodline or like family or anything like that. But they connected as friends, basically, is what it ended up being. And if Jonathan didn't do that, like I said earlier, David may not have ascended to where he needed to be. But Jonathan knew it was God's will that happened, And how this pertains to us today is, a lot of times, I think, am I doing God's will? Is this what he wants me to do? Or is it my will and I've kind of let him, venture into it a little bit, but it's really not exactly his will. It's me kind of driving the bus. But as Christians, we need to let God direct us everywhere we go and whatever we do, no matter how small it is. I've also come to realize that. It says the church can become a place where people are willing to serve one another sacrificially. It begins with individuals who look beyond their own needs. Simple acts of friendship and loyalty can make a difference. So, being kind, of course, is a great thing. Being kind to everyone you come into contact with, even when it's not easy. But when you do that, you shine Christ's light into the world, which is what we should be about as a Christian family. It says this is not foolproof strategy. Some will not reciprocate, okay? So you may be kind to somebody and they may not be kind back to you, right? But we're called, but Christians are called to hospitality, as it says here in the lesson. Even generosity and love for our enemies, which is very tough at times. If kindness goes unreciprocated, it remains kindness well spent. So that, basically what that statement means at the end. You're not being kind just to get it back from somebody. Somebody says, oh, look how nice those people are. They're nice. They're nice to me, whatever. You're doing that so you can shine the light of Christ, like I said. So when somebody looks at you and goes, what's different about those people? Why do they treat people like they treat people? And it's because we have Christ in our lives, and that's what they should learn from that. Just a thought to remember from this lesson says, honor God in your friendships, okay? So I would just say, if you got somebody that's a real good friend, most of the time you're going to treat them well, hopefully. But not just treating your friends well, you have to treat everyone else well too, to show the love of God and to further his kingdom, which is what I think ultimately what Jonathan did here. That's all I got for you today. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And I hope everybody has a good